WADR, promoting dialogue.
It is 6 p.m. in Dakar, 7 p.m. in Niamey. Good evening and welcome to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM and online at wadr.org. First, our top stories. The Nigerian government evacuates its citizens from Iran amid rising tensions in the Middle East. Border disputes escalate between Liberia and Guinea following claims by Guinean soldiers over part of Liberian territory.
Guinean Armed Forces came heavily armed. We started the engagement. Why are they planting poles on our land? So they have no right planting flag pole on our land and hosting their flag.
Niger faces overcrowding prison crisis with majority pre-trial detainees, and sub-Saharan Africa increases firearm imports in recent years, latest report reveals. Please stay with us.
On the news, this is Deborah Amuo.
Many thanks for joining us. The Nigerian government has begun evacuating its citizens from Iran as tensions in the Middle East continue to escalate. This situation follows recent military strikes involving the United States, Israel, against Iran. Authorities say the move aims to ensure citizens' safety while also assessing possible economic implications for Nigeria. Our Abuja correspondent, Yechenu Sasetu, gives us the details in this report.
The federal government says it is evacuating willing Nigerians in Iran, escorting them across the Armenian border as part of efforts to ensure their safety amid rising tensions in the Middle East. The crisis began on February 28 after coordinated military strikes on Iran by the United States and Israel, triggering retaliatory missile and drone attacks across parts of the region and heightening fears of a wider conflict. Nigerian authorities say they are closely monitoring the situation because of its potential impact on the country's economy. In a statement released Wednesday, the Minister of Finance, Wale Edun, noted that concerns over possible disruptions to major energy supply routes, including the Strait of Hormuz, have already led to volatility in global crude oil prices and financial markets. Economists are now urging the federal government to put measures in place to cushion the impact of increase in fuel prices. Managing Director of Banjuku Farms, Tunji Banjuku, explains how rising costs affect businesses and consumers.
So what we have experienced in the last few weeks has been rising costs of transportation for us as operators in the food industry.
Oil and gas expert Kelvin Emmanuel is also calling on the federal government to consider targeted subsidies to reduce the burden on Nigerians.
Times are tough. Let's pick 40 million out of 220 million. Can we credit them directly? Because we have their data as government to enable them to cushion the impact of petrol prices. That 312,000 barrels the government was using for crude oil swap as subsidy that is no longer in existence. This is the use for it.
Analysts warn that while the conflict remains outside Nigeria, the ripple effect on energy prices and the broader economy could be felt if tensions in the Middle East continue to escalate. For WADR, Yechenu Sasetu in Abuja.
Meanwhile, tensions are heightening along the border between Liberia and Guinea. The dispute revolves around accusations that armed Guinean soldiers who crossed into Liberian territory halted the Foya-Vaun road project and seized construction equipment. The incident occurred near the Sor-Lumba border in Lofa County, located in Liberia's northern region. WADR's Monrovia correspondent Abraham Parker reports.
According to residents in Lofa County, Guinean soldiers crossed into Liberia and stopped work being carried out by the BK Construction Enterprise. The soldiers on Tuesday hosted the Guinean flag on the Liberian side of the border, claiming ownership of the territory. This action was met with resistance from residents who subsequently took down the Guinean flag and raised the Liberian flag. Here is a narration from a resident regarding the situation.
This morning, the Guinean Armed Forces came heavily armed. We started engaging. Why are they planting poles on our land? They already asked us to take our poles. They had no right planting flag pole on our land and hosting their flag. We started to drive up, we engaged them, we talked, and we were able to mobilize men, joined by our brothers from the various Kisi towns and other villages. When they came, we were able to overwhelm them, told them to fight. How can my country be older than your country, then you draw demarcation with me? Where were you when I was independent and you were on a colony, you were able to up your flag pole? We replanted ours.
Meanwhile, the Liberian government has assured its citizens that it is actively addressing the situation through diplomatic channels. In a statement, the government emphasized its commitment to resolving the issue peacefully. President Joseph Boakai has dispatched a high-level inter-ministerial delegation to the Bolo comprising representatives from the Ministries of Defense, Local Government, Foreign Affairs, and Justice. The delegation is tasked with addressing the current situation at the Bolo. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
Countries in sub-Saharan Africa have been increasingly importing firearms in recent years. The quantity of imported arms between 2016 and 2025 represents 13% of the global total. This figure comes from an annual report by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute titled Trends in International Arms Transfers 2025. The report highlights that global arms transfers have increased since 2011 to 2015, driven by significant rearmament in Europe and a major reconfiguration of arms flows worldwide. Augustine Colley tells us more.
Nigeria is the leading arms importer in sub-Saharan Africa, accounting for 16% of sub-regional imports, followed by Senegal at 8.8% and Mali representing 8.0%. However, the sub-region represents 2.2% of the total global imports of major arms during this period. Published on March 9, 2026, the report reveals that China has established itself as the sub-region's main supplier, having delivered major armaments to 23 African states and captured 22% of sub-regional imports. Russia ranks second with 12% of deliveries, ahead of Turkey, representing 11%. According to the survey, African imports of major armaments fell by 41% between the two 5-year periods, with Africa now accounting for only 4.3% of global imports between 2021 to 2025, far beyond Europe, Asia, Oceania, and the Middle East. In its publication, the Research Institute states that the main suppliers to the African continent remain the United States, China, Russia, and France. However, the report highlights the particular difficulty of tracing arms flows to African conflict zones due to high level of secrecy.
Augustine Colley reporting there.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
We now turn to the Central Sahel region, precisely Niger, where the Niamey Central Prison is severely overcrowded, reaching an occupancy rate of 400%. Most of the inmates are in pre-trial detention at the facility. Families and legal representatives of the prisoners attribute the overcrowding to the slow processing of cases within the country's justice system. Imo Edet tells us more in the following report.
Niger's Minister of Justice Aliyu Dauda visited Niamey prison on Monday and observed the overcrowded conditions. Originally constructed to accommodate 400 inmates 80 years ago, the facility now houses nearly 1,900 prisoners. Prison officials attribute the overcrowding to the slow processing of legal cases. In an official statement, the Minister of Justice confirms that 3/4 of the facility, approximately 1,500 inmates, are currently held in pre-trial detention. For several years, authorities have been constructing a new detention center with a capacity of 1,500 beds to replace the overcrowded facility. As of 2024, Niger has around 40 prisons, which together house nearly 16,000 inmates. However, Justice Minister Aliyu Dauda promised that the legal system will expedite the processing of cases for prisoners in pre-trial detention at Niamey prison.
A report by Imo Edet. In neighboring Mali, the heat wave is gradually increasing across the entire country. The National Meteorological Agency, Mali Meteo, is warning of a significant rise in temperatures nationwide. Between March 9th and 15th, highs could reach between 34 and 45 degrees Celsius. In the capital, Bamako, the situation is already impacting the daily lives of many residents. Sankule Janko reports.
At midday, as the sun reaches its zenith, some motorcycle taxi drivers seek shelter from the heat. In the shade of a tree, Michel Kamate and his colleagues take a break to avoid heat stroke while hoping for potential customers.
It's been incredibly hot lately. If the sun becomes unbearable, we have no choice but to stay under this tree until a customer arrives. It's the only way to protect ourselves from this intense heat wave, which could have serious consequences for our health.
On the roads of Bamako, commuters are also feeling the effects of these high temperatures, a situation that makes travel difficult.
What I usually do is from 2 p.m. onwards, I don't go out anymore. I stay indoors and often I drink a lot of water to rehydrate.
Faced with this situation, health specialists recommend taking precautions to avoid heat-related illnesses. According to them, prolonged exposure to heat can cause heat stroke or heat exhaustion. Dr. Saliu Mohammadou, physician at Gabriel Toure Hospital.
Now, the advice we can give people is to avoid going out when it's very hot outside, drink plenty of water, and always seek shelter. We also often see parents leaving children or elderly people in parked vehicles. This should be avoided.
According to Mali Meteo, this rise in temperatures is expected to continue for several days. The organization urges the public to remain vigilant and adopt simple measures to limit the effects of the heat.
That was a report by Bamako correspondent Aliu Cham, voiced by Sankule Janko. UN Women, in partnership with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, is calling for urgent action to make equitable justice a transformative force for women and girls. The call is contained in a joint statement issued after the commemoration of International Women's Day 2026. In the original op-ed titled "Making Equitable Justice a Driver of Transformation for Women and Girls in West and Central Africa," the UN organizations warn that persistent barriers to justice fuel violence, impunity, and instability. Let's join Usman Umar for the details.
The report underscores the realities faced across the region. Despite legislative efforts, the legal, institutional, and social barriers that limit access to justice and protection for women and girls still exist. The statement highlights that currently, girls represent nearly 70% victims of trafficking cases in West Africa. Mirele Kamitatu, Deputy Director of UN Women for West and Central Africa, sheds light on the steps taken by UN Women to address the challenges faced in addressing trafficking of girls in the region.
Looking at anti-trafficking responses, women are fairly represented. And that's the lens that we are taking on. First, building capacity for institutions to understand the conditions in which women are being trafficked. Also, designing gender responsive to trafficking so that in terms of the services that they are accessing, but also in terms of representation of women in law enforcement, judicial services.
While there have been various commitments by governments in the region to address issues related to women and girls, including the commitment to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, Mirele Kamitatu reflects on the challenges affecting the effectiveness of these laws.
One issue that is really still pending is how well those laws and policies are being implemented. And that is where having more women as judges, as police officers, in also emerging police areas such as forensics, but also community policing makes a difference.
The joint statement emphasized that by investing in women's leadership, closing funding gaps, and scaling proven initiatives, the region can turn barriers into lasting opportunities for women and girls.
Usman Umar with that report. Now in Côte d'Ivoire, Amnesty International is denouncing the continued detention of several people arrested during opposition protests in October 2025. Among the detainees are pregnant women and others who allegedly had no involvement in the demonstrations. The human rights organization says some of the prisoners are experiencing deplorable health conditions in prison. For more on this report, let's join Abdullahi Hassan.
In a press statement issued on Tuesday, Amnesty International stated that several of the individuals arrested during the October protests have been convicted in unfair trials in which they were denied a lawyer. While denouncing the deplorable health conditions of detained prisoners, the human rights organization expresses serious concerns about the situation of 3 pregnant women who it says are still being held at the Abidjan prison complex since their arrest last year. Claire and Felix, a researcher at Amnesty International, West and Central Africa Bureau, condemns this situation.
Being pregnant in detention must be very difficult because this is not an environment that is favorable for pregnant women. We have been told that they do not have the prenatal care appropriate, and also they're afraid that they would give birth in detention.
The human rights organization says the use of blanket bans on protests in October 2025 was a stark failure of the Ivorian authorities to uphold international human rights to peaceful assembly. In this context, Claire and Felix says
the ban was not in accordance with international law, so we just call on the government to organize the appeals and the first trial as soon as possible, and also to respect the right to a fair trial and the prisoners' rights.
It should be noted that a few weeks before the October 2025 presidential election in Côte d'Ivoire, the prefect of Abidjan banned a peaceful gathering planned for October 4 by opposition parties to denounce the exclusion of 2 candidates from the presidential election. Despite the ban, several young people and opposition party activists attempting to gather peacefully were arrested. More than 50 people were sentenced to 3 years in prison for disturbing public order, among other charges.
A report filed by Abdullahi Hassan. You are listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM Dakar and online at wadr.org. Here's a reminder of our top stories. The Nigerian government evacuated citizens from Iran amid rising tension in the Middle East. Border dispute escalates between Liberia and Guinea following claims by Guinean soldiers over part of Liberian territory. Niger faces overcrowding prison crisis with majority pre-trial detainees. And coming up, we have our guest interview as well as sports news. Please stay with us.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
We head to the Gambia as the National Assembly reviews a long-awaited report about the sale and disposal of assets belonging to former President Yahya Jammeh. Prepared by a special select committee, the report contains findings of an investigation into how the assets were handled after Jammeh left office in 2017. The committee chairperson, Abdoulaye Cisse, presented the document to lawmakers on Tuesday following 4 months of inquiries and public hearings. Sandona Mendy reports.
The committee says its inquiry included testimonies from more than 70 witnesses and the review of thousands of documents from several state institutions. These include the Ministry of Justice, the Central Bank of the Gambia, and other agencies involved in managing and disposing of the assets. According to the reports, the investigation uncovered a number of systematic failures, institutional weaknesses, and significant financial discrepancies. Chairperson Abdoulaye Cisse presented the findings to lawmakers.
These include deficiencies in documentation, inconsistencies in valuation processes, challenges in asset preservation and record keeping, gaps in institutional coordination, and shortcomings in the management and reconciliation of proceeds arising from the sales of assets.
Meanwhile, lawmakers also raised concerns about a lack of transparency and administrative challenges surrounding the sale and disposal process of Yahya Jammeh's assets.
The property Bigelow TDA, 3.75 hectares. The Director General did not report any form of allocations being made therein.
Problem was not the ambiguity in the court order itself, but the failure of the Ministry of Justice.
We found one discrepancy of head of cattle, as well as 180 unaccounted for.
Among its key recommendations, the Legislative Committee calls on the executive branch through the National Police to open criminal investigations into the supervision of the Public Prosecutor's Office. The proposed probe would look into the role of former Attorney General and Justice Minister Abubakar M. Tambedu. The committee says investigators should examine allegations of possible violations of the Public Finance Act, abuse of office, and other economic crimes linked to the handling of the assets. If sufficient evidence is found, criminal proceedings should be initiated in line with Gambian law. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Sangdana Mendy, reporting from Banjul.
Politics, analyses on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
The guest interview focuses on Côte d'Ivoire, where several people arrested during opposition protests in October 2025 are still in detention. Amnesty International is denouncing their prolonged detention, as the human rights organization says among the detainees are pregnant women who had no involvement in the demonstrations. Our guest is Claire Ann Felix, a researcher at Amnesty International West and Central Africa Bureau.
In October, there were protests that were banned by the government. And so we know that since then, there have been people that have been detained without cause. Those people were going to work or simply close to where the demonstration have taken place. There are a lot of people that are still in pre-trial. And there are also people that have been tried without a lawyer, which is so in conditions that are unfair. And so other detainees that have been denied their rights to visit. So with Amnesty International, we asked the courts to rule on the appeals in accordance with the rights to a fair trial. And also to rule on the first sentence trials. And also we call on the authorities to respect the rights to the detainees.
What's the significant impact, do you think, this continued detention of people or quote-unquote protesters arrested during the October protests in Côte d'Ivoire could have on these detainees or the country in general?
Thank you very much. It's a very good question because it has actually a big impact on the families, on the detainees. So we have been talking with different families. For example, there is one man that is the main breadwinner of a family of 2 children. He's also taking care financially of his sister and his mother, and therefore they're not able to pay the rent or to pay their medication anymore. And also this person has lost his job since he has been detained, and he has been convicted to 36 months of detention. So I would say that for the families of the detainees, this has a huge impact on their social and economic rights.
Why is Amnesty particularly concerned about the 3 pregnant women currently being held at the Abidjan prison complex?
Well, as you can imagine, being pregnant in detention must be very difficult because this is not an environment that is favorable for pregnant women. We have been told that they do not have the prenatal care appropriate. And also we have been told that they're afraid that they would give birth in a detention. And again, to give birth in a detention center would not be an appropriate place to give birth.
There is this part of the press statement from Amnesty which says that some detainees had no involvement in the protests. What evidence suggests that innocent bystanders were arrested and imprisoned?
Thank you. So we have been talking to families and we have been talking to lawyers. And they have been telling different stories of people that were not taking part of the demonstration. Some of them they were on their way to work, or they were just close to where the detention were taking place, and they did not take part in the demonstration. But even if they did, what we want to emphasize is that in October, Amnesty International denounced the fact that the ban was not in accordance with international law, and that the government should have authorized and managed the demonstration and ensure that they complied with public order. And so what we believe is that those that took part of the demonstration and exercised their right peacefully, so the one that exercised their right to a peaceful assembly, they should be released.
Claire Ann Felix is a researcher at Amnesty International, West and Central Africa Bureau. Now we bring you some sports stories, beginning with tennis, where world number one Aryna Sabalenka has advanced to the quarterfinals of the Indian Wells Open after defeating Naomi Osaka in straight sets 6-2, 6-4. Sabalenka dominated the 80-minute match with powerful ground strokes and strong serves. She will now face either Canada's Victoria Mboko or American Amanda Anisimova in the next round. In basketball, the women's national basketball teams of Mali, Nigeria, and Senegal are kicking off their 2026 World Cup qualifying campaigns with highly publicized matches. In today's fixtures, Mali faces China, Nigeria battles with Colombia, while Senegal will face the United States at the end of the first day. It's a tough start that will serve as a real test of character for the African players. In the UEFA Champions League, Liverpool suffered a 1-0 defeat to Galatasaray in the first leg of their last 16 clash in Istanbul, with Mario Lemina scoring the only goal early in the match. Atletico Madrid handed Tottenham Hotspur a heavy defeat after a disastrous start that saw Spurs concede 4 goals inside the opening 23 minutes. Meanwhile, Barcelona secured a dramatic 1-1 draw away at Newcastle United, with Lamine Yamal scoring a stoppage time penalty to level the tie ahead of the second leg next week. And with that, we've come to the end of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening. Many thanks to Ismaila Kamara and Maudo Diouf for the technical assistance. My name is Deborah Amuwo. Good evening.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM,
Hilltop Radio 104.7 FM,
and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County,
Radio Kagama 94.5 FM, Niba County, DCN Radio 91.3